Okay, let's dive right in. We're about to talk about a scientific breakthrough that is completely flipping a century of medical wisdom on its head. I'm talking about a whole new way of understanding type 2 diabetes. And honestly, it changes everything.
For so long, a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes it felt like a life sentence, right? A condition you just had to manage but could never, ever cure. But here's the big question. What if that whole idea was just wrong? What if the central mystery has actually been solved?
So let's set the stage. For the longest time, type 2 diabetes, we'll call it T2DM, was a real puzzle. I mean, we kind of understood type 1, but type 2, it was just seen as this complicated chronic disease that you were stuck with for good.
And until really recently, like 2006, the actual root cause, it was a total mystery. So naturally, the medical world focused on just managing the symptoms. The thinking was, hey, it's an unavoidable, progressive thing. The goal was never remission. It was just management.
But then, everything started to shift. A group of researchers in Newcastle, in the UK, they started following this trail of clues. And these clues, they pointed away from all that old thinking and towards a very, very specific culprit. This is where our detective story really kicks off. All right, clue number 1 came from the liver. Using some pretty cool new imaging tech, scientists saw something wild, a ton of fat built up inside the livers of people with T2DM. And get this, it wasn't just a side effect. Nope, it was the cause of a huge problem. That fatty liver was becoming resistant to insulin, which meant it started just pumping out way too much glucose, jacking up blood sugar levels. Okay, so that was the liver. Clue number 2, it came from the pancreas. We're talking specifically about the beta cells, the little factories that make insulin. It turns out that for some people who are genetically susceptible, bathing these super delicate cells in excess fat, well, it's like throwing a handful of sand into the gears of a finely tuned machine. It just gums up the works, and they can't release the right amount of insulin when you eat a meal. So we've got 2 big clues on the table. A fatty liver that's ignoring insulin, and a fatty pancreas with beta cells that are struggling. But how do they connect? Well, this is where a researcher named Roy Taylor came in and put all the pieces together with this really elegant theory he called the twin cycle hypothesis. And this just perfectly shows what's going on. It's this vicious, self-reinforcing loop. Check it out. You take in too many calories. That leads to fat building up in your liver. Then that fatty liver becomes insulin resistant and starts exporting even more fat out into your bloodstream. So where does that fat go? Well, it gets stored in other organs, including the pancreas. Now that fat in the pancreas messes up the beta cells so they can't release enough insulin after you eat. And the final kicker? That higher blood sugar after your meal signals the liver to create and store even more fat. See? The liver cycle feeds the pancreas cycle, which then feeds right back into the liver cycle. It's a perfect storm. Now, that's a brilliant theory, right? But a theory is just a theory until you can prove it. The big question, the absolute crucial one was, can we break this vicious cycle? And that single question, it led to some truly groundbreaking clinical trials. The first of these was called the Counterpoint study, and the logic behind it was so simple, it was genius. If excess fat inside your organs is the problem, what happens if we just take it away? So they designed an experiment. They used a low-calorie diet as a tool with a clear target, about 15 kilograms of weight loss. The goal was to literally drain the fat from the organs and see if that twin cycle would grind to a halt, and maybe even reverse. And the very first results, they were absolutely stunning. Get this, 7 days. Just 7 days. That's all it took for the participants' fasting blood glucose levels to drop right back down to normal non-diabetic levels. I mean, 1 week to reverse a key marker of a supposedly lifelong disease. Incredible. And when the full results came in, they confirmed every single prediction of the twin cycle hypothesis. It was a slam dunk. The participants, on average, lost that target of around 15 kilos. The fat in their livers, it just plummeted, which meant their livers became sensitive to insulin again. The fat in their pancreas also went way down. And maybe the most exciting part of all, those sleepy beta cells, they woke up. They started secreting insulin properly again. It was like the machine had been fixed. But this study also showed something else that was really critical. Timing is everything. For people who'd had T2DM for less than 4 years, the remission rate was an amazing 73%. Now, the longer someone had the condition, the lower the chances got. But remission was still possible, even for people who'd had diabetes for years. And what that suggested was profound. The beta cells weren't dead. They were just dormant, waiting to be woken up. Okay, but that was in a controlled lab setting, right? Could this actually work out in the real world? That was the big question for the next much larger study, called the DIRECT trial. This one was run in regular doctors' offices, administered by nurses. And the answer was a massive, resounding yes. Almost half of the people in the study achieved remission at the 1-year mark. And even at 2 years, more than a third were still in remission. And all of this was done without any diabetes meds. Just incredible. Okay, this next idea is, well, it's arguably the single most important concept to come out of all this research. It finally explains that big mystery. Why do some people who are very overweight never get diabetes, while other people who have a supposedly normal BMI do? The answer is something called your personal fat threshold. See, we're all used to thinking about weight in terms of BMI, right? The body mass index. But that's just a population average. This new model? It basically says, throw that old idea out the window. When it comes to type 2 diabetes, what matters isn't how your weight compares to everyone else. What matters is how much fat your own unique body can safely store. Think of it like this. Every single one of us has a personal, safe storage depot for fat, mostly right under our skin. But here's the key. Everyone's depot is a different size. And once your personal depot is full, well, any extra fat has to go somewhere. So it overflows into places it shouldn't be, like your liver and your pancreas. And that overflow is the trigger for type 2 diabetes, completely regardless of what your BMI chart says.
And if you need proof, just look at this number, 72%. That is a staggering statistic. 72% of people with a BMI over 45, who are classified as severely obese, never develop type 2 diabetes. Why? Because their bodies just happen to have a much larger, safer capacity to store that fat under the skin. It never has to overflow.
So what's the bottom line here? Where does all this leave us? Well, it leaves us with a complete and total paradigm shift. It's a new verdict that completely reverses 100 years of medical dogma about type 2 diabetes.
I mean, this table just sums it all up perfectly, doesn't it? The old view was that T2DM was lifelong and progressive. The new view, it's potentially reversible. The old cause was complex and mysterious. The new cause, it's just excess internal fat. And the solution, it's gone from lifelong management to significant weight loss. It's a whole new world.
And I really want you to hear this powerful quote from the lead researcher himself, Professor Roy Taylor. He says, if a person has T2DM, they have become too heavy for their own body, nothing to do with the population science concept of obesity. That just perfectly captures it, right? It's not about being obese according to some chart. It's just about exceeding what your individual body can safely handle.
So let's just quickly recap the most important takeaways. First, type 2 diabetes is caused by excess fat inside the liver and pancreas. Simple as that. Second, it's triggered when you go over your personal fat threshold, not by BMI alone. Third, remission is absolutely possible for a lot of people, usually through a weight loss of about 10 to 15%. And finally, doing that actually returns your organ function and your glucose control back to normal, non-diabetic levels. Look, this discovery fundamentally changes the entire conversation around type 2 diabetes. It shifts it from a story of lifelong management to one of empowerment and real potential recovery. It gives millions of people a new path forward. So the big question left on the table is, what happens next? How do we make this incredible new reality accessible to every single person who needs it?